South Africa is bracing for an unfavourable credit rating review from Moody's later today. Moody's has South Africa's credit rating at its lowest investment grade rating with a stable outlook. It's the last of the big three credit ratings agency that hasn't put South Africa at sub-investment grade. Most analysts believe that an immediate downgrade remains unlikely despite bleak mid-term budget outlook. However, they expect some sort of negative assessment, such as a change from a stable outlook to a negative one. For more on this, I'm joined in studio by Saveshen Pillay. He's the Director at Credit Rating Analytics. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News. Talk us through what goes into the type of decision that Moody's will be making on the outlook of South Africa.
Well, Nzika, before I begin, thank you for having me. And in terms of the ratings decision, look, it is going to be a bit of a touch and go in terms of whether the outlook's going to change. But in terms of what goes into the decision, so Moody's basically would break up the rating into four different categories. So you break it up into your economic strength, your institutional strength, fiscal, and susceptibility to event risk. So in terms of that, we're in a bit of a difficult position because the fiscal assessment is where South Africa is lacking quite a lot. And a lot of that was brought up in the medium-term budget speech. But on that same token, the figures that were released, I don't think it came as any sort of a surprise to Moody's because they expected that to be in that range. And if you look at the update that they came through in September, I think everything was as they predicted, shall I say. So in terms of that fiscal outlook, that's going to be the difficult part, and that's going to be why it's going to be a bit touch and go in terms of that. Yeah.
So if I had to put you on the spot and say, can you give us a prediction of what Moody's is going to say, what would that be?
So look, I'd say that they're going to indicate that the institutional strength of the country has remained the same, if not improved. The susceptibility to event risk, that's also remained the same. But they are going to point out that the fiscal assessment has deteriorated. So they currently have us on an M+ level. And based on, after going through all 39 variables that obviously go into that ratings assessment, I'm of the view that the fiscal assessment will drop from M+ to M. But that still won't have an impact on the actual rating that comes out. So in terms of that, I think they're gonna keep the rating as is, keep the outlook as stable. But it might be a bit touch and go. It could either get changed to downgrade or to negative, or in the worst case, it could get changed to review for downgrade. So that would be obviously the worst case scenario. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. But as it is, I'd say it should stay as stable. And on investment grade.
So there is a lot of panic that the outlook will change to negative and that will further down the line lead to a downgrade. Just talk to us about the impact of that type of rating decision on the economy.
Okay, so Nzika, it's actually interesting that you ask because a lot of the times the economy, a lot of people don't focus on it. They focus on the impact to financial markets. But if you look at all the countries that have been downgraded, that have lost their final investment grade rating, and you look at what's happened to those economies. So the things that stand out is that the foreign direct investment drops within the year after the investment decision, and that would obviously be negative for us because President Ramaphosa is on the 300 billion drive to get a lot of that foreign investment in. In terms of your industry that makes up GDP, so in 86% of the countries in the year after the final rating occurs, what happens is that industry makes up less of GDP. And why that's important is that that's where a lot of your labor-intensive jobs are. So, for example, your mining, manufacturing, those jobs sit there. And in all of the countries that have lost that final investment grade rating, the unemployment figures have only recovered after year 3. So that's not good, especially on the backdrop of South Africa's current unemployment figures. That's not going to be too good. So for the actual guy on the street or for the actual person, there's a lot at stake. So in terms of the rating, let's hope South Africa keeps it on investment grade for the immediate future. Look, it's not impossible. If you look at Romania, they were downgraded by Fitch and S&P, and they were kept on an investment grade rating with Moody's, and as time went by, S&P and Fitch eventually upgraded the country back to investment grade, and Moody's kept it as is. So if a similar thing happens to South Africa, that would be great from that perspective.
There's obviously a sense that Moody's is the kinder rating agency to South Africa in terms of how they've left us. Talk to us about if that so-called kindness will continue, and that's just a perception, or they use a different system perhaps to the other ratings agencies.
So the system that they use is different in Zinga. Look, I'd say that there is a bit of kindness, but if you look at the actual ratings model that Moody's deploys, due to the strengths that South Africa has in relation to that rating model, it's the reason why our rating is still at investment grade. So it's not like they've done us a favor and kept us on investment grade, because often what happens is that the public's perception of the deterioration of the economic fundamentals of the country and the actual ratings model is different. So whereas things might have deteriorated, but in relation to the ratings model that Moody's employs, it hasn't deteriorated to warrant a downgrade, for that matter. So in terms of that rating going forward, I'd say that there is a higher probability of a change in outlook occurring next year. And one of the reasons for that is that just on those fiscal metrics, so if we focus on especially the not so much the debt burden of the debt to GDP and the debt to revenue, but if we look at the debt affordability, so that's the problem in terms of your interest payments to revenue and your interest payments to GDP. So that's where South Africa has a problem, because our debt is quite expensive. And if you look at the rating bands that Moody's uses, I mean, for us to move to a much lower level that would warrant a downgrade on the debt affordability, we would need to have probably a ratio of about interest to revenue of 16%. We're currently just under 15%, and interest to GDP of 4%, and we just under 4%. So whereas I think it's the debt burden, the debt to GDP, that's keeping us afloat on those fiscal metrics, but that's deteriorating as time is going by. And the increase in the quantum of debt that we have, I think it's with the medium-term budget speech, it's projected to grow at 13%. If we move, if the year continues and the figures that are released next year indicates that it's 15%, what happens is that we move to the next notch on that rating model, and Moody's can make an adjustment to the fiscal assessment, and that can then result in probably the outlook changing next year, and probably a greater impetus for a downgrade and stuff to come through, probably in the year after.
Thanks so much for your time and explanations. Saveshen Pillay, Director Credit Rating Analytics, joining me in